All right, you guys hear me okay? I gotta tell you, man, it's such a beautiful day. I feel like we should, go and move outside and have the class on the patio and sit in a big circle, sing a few songs to get started or something, but I won't subject you to that. So, all right, so let's get going here. My name is Jeff Burtoft, and I know everybody is really looking for a big pot of money that they can just swim through, right? That's why we make apps, isn't it? Because we all want that big win in the end. We're gonna make some app and it's gonna be so cool that Google or Facebook is gonna wanna buy it off of us, and then we're just gonna spend the rest of our lives swimming through money. And if you don't know who that is, just ask your parents, because they're probably more my age. But that would be nice. It is always nice when we hit a big reward, and maybe sometimes we work for companies whose goals are to make that money, but a lot of times what we're looking for is the user. We have a great application, and apps tend to be geared towards specific use cases. They tend to be geared towards reaching a certain type of user. And a lot of times what you're looking for is to reach more users, to find more people who are going to find a use and an application for your app and get them into the fold. So that's what we want to talk about today, because when we write for the web, we have a blank screen. Oh wow, it was a beautiful animation too. All right, we'll just go. Thank you. So when we write for the web, we have some really great benefits because we're out there, we own a space, we own that URL, we have our own domain, and there's a lot of users who can be reached there. But there's also a lot of users who are going to go to the app stores first and find or look for their solution in an app store. So we want to make sure that our web app can also reach those users. There's a number of different ways that you can write web apps to turn them into store apps. And every time I see a new solution out there targeting web developers, it looks like it's just a one button, push this button, and now your web app is going to be an award-winning native application. That's not what we're trying to do with ManifoldJS. In fact, the problem with a lot of that is that it actually takes the web out of the web app. And you lose so many goodies whenever you leave the web. So when we're talking about the different types of web apps, we have the hosted web apps, which we're going to be talking about predominantly today, and I'll kind of get into that more in the next slide there. But that involves a web server. You leave your content on the web server. There's the packaged web app, where you take that content from a web server, there's no web server involved, and you stick it inside the package, and then you ship it in the package. And then we also are starting to see a lot of transpiled web apps. And that's where we're taking code from one language and transcoding it into another language. And that's something like React.js or native script. And I don't want to actually downplay those because there's some really interesting, some really powerful stuff going on there. I use React myself for some of my apps. There's a lot of benefit there for us, but I kind of group that together with the packaged apps. And the reason is because in both of those cases, we're taking the code from the web server and we're packaging it up. One of them turns it into a different language, one of them leaves it as JavaScript and HTML, and we ship it as a store app. So I kind of look at those together. All right, now when we talk about hosted web apps, this is what I mean. When you have a hosted web app, to a user it shouldn't look any different than any other app, right? To them it's just an app. But what it really is there's a container app that we submit to the store, okay, or is generated real time, depending on the platform. But that container app then points to the content that is still live on your web server. So you are still pointing to code on the web, which means if you update the code on your website, it's going to, I'm standing for, I was going to stand on this side, sorry. When you update the code on your website, it's going to update the code in that app. Because the code doesn't live in the app, it actually points out to the code on your web server. So that's why we call it hosted, because it's still hosted on your web server. Now, the reason why I kind of want to focus on hosted web apps and why I think it's so powerful and I'm passionate about it is because I'm passionate about the web. And there's so many parts of having a web app that we don't want to leave behind just because we're moving into a store. So you can think about it, you have a workflow already, right? Your workflow is probably something like, I store my code in a Git repo, I clone it down, I make changes, or I push it or do a pull request, and then when it hits the Git repo, it has an automatic deploy into my test server where people can start testing my code. So you have a workflow already, and you don't want to change that workflow because you use it for a reason, probably because it really works for you and it works for your team. So whenever you have a hosted web app, you don't have to change that workflow. You probably already have frameworks that you use, right? Like you're doing A/B testing, or you have particular JavaScript frameworks that your code relies on. None of that has to change just because you move into a hosted web app space, because it's still web code, right? It's still HTML5. You may write a language that doesn't run inside of an application. I started as a Ruby developer many years ago. Is there anyone who maybe writes Ruby or ASP.NET or PHP? Those languages that we use to build web apps, they all compile down to HTML5, which is why they run in the browser. So none of that has to change. So now you can still continue to use PHP or ASP.NET or whatever language it is that you're using to write your web app. And then there's some really important parts of the web, like a URL, that you don't want to leave either. So a URL, having your own domain, is important because that's a space that you can always go have users go to, right? That's not going to be a space that's subject to rules of Microsoft or rules of Apple or rules of Google or Firefox. It's the open web. And you can link to it. You can just send that link off, and you know that your user is going to be able to click on that link and see the content without having to download an application. And we also have cool logos for the web. And that's really important because we got to wear the t-shirts, right? And if the logos are ugly, then we'll look ugly, and that's really important too. The reason we want to go into the store, though, is because there's also a lot of benefits of having an actual application. First of all, just simply being able to reach those users. Having store discovery is going to be important to us. We want to make sure that the users who are going to Bing or to Google to search for what we produce in our web app are going to find us, but we also want to make sure that the stores who click that, or excuse me, the users who click that little icon on their device to open up a store are going to find us too, not just our competition. Generally you also have an expanded API base. So we'll talk about a number of different ways that you can do that in a few minutes with ManifoldJS, but working in a trusted environment like a store application generally gives you the ability to be able to access APIs that you don't normally have access to in the browser themselves. Maybe things like toast notifications, or being able to access contacts or the calendar on the device, or Bluetooth stack or something of that sort. And then a lot of platforms will also give you things like isolated memory, your own cache, to know that whenever you're downloading things to your cache, another website isn't going to push your content out because it's dedicated to your app. So having a hosted web app should give us the best of both worlds. Allows us to keep all the benefits of the web and take on some of the benefits of the store apps as well. Now, one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that not all websites are going to make great apps. And it kind of goes back to what I was talking about at first. if you have a shitty website, it's going to be a shitty app. Turning it into a store app doesn't change that. It doesn't suddenly make it better. So you need to make sure that whenever you're thinking about the type of apps that you want to submit to the store, you want to make sure that they work with touch, because a lot of devices have touch. You want to make sure that they're responsive, because you're going to be working on tons of different screen sizes out there. You want to make sure that they're modern, right? That they always have indication as to what's happening in the application, that they have some sort of offline experience. If you get a 404 inside of an app, that can be really confusing for a user. So you want to make sure that you are at least capturing that and giving your user something for that. So when you start to venture into the native app space, make sure that you're starting with an application that will make a good app. So hosted web app support today is actually pretty exciting. We have a number of platforms that already support it natively. So FireFox OS, you can actually just go and fill out a web form, upload your images, and put in your URL, and they will release that into the Amazon App Store. So you can run it on Android devices. You can run it on the Amazon Fire devices. Chrome OS, the majority of their apps are hosted web apps. So if you're reaching to Chrome users, Chrome runs on every platform. So that's a great way if you have users who are using Chrome to be able to reach them. Also Chrome OS, the App Store is the primary way to get applications on those devices as well. So there's a lot of industries like education that really rely on the app stores there. And then we're proud to say that Windows 10 now supports hosted web apps natively as well. So you can actually submit a hosted web app to the Windows 10 store, and it lives right alongside all the other applications in the store. And then there's other platforms that we've been polyfilling for some time. And this is usually done with Cordova. Cordova is generally used for a packaged environment where you take that code and you put it inside the Cordova app, and then it spits out the packages for the different platforms. But you can also point that Cordova app to your web server and have a hosted web app. And ManifoldJS actually uses Cordova to build its polyfills, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. All right, so let's take a minute and do a little demo here. I'm going to start with one of those really high quality apps I was talking about. This one is called HTML5 Roles. Anyone out there like HTML5 Rocks? You use that site? Then you're going to love this site, because it's just like that, only better. Because instead of code, it actually just has pictures of roles. It's pretty amazing. So let me show you some of these roles. We start out with some basic Kaiser roles. This is a Thanksgiving role, very HTML5 inspired. There's other types of roles out there, edible ones. There's fat rolls too, right? So we have some of them on there. This one's kind of cute, right? It's a really fat puppy. And then there's the kind of roles that you see a lot in Washington State, where Microsoft headquarters are. So we have a lot of those, right? Which always tends to lead back to the food roles on there. So I'm going to take this amazing site, and for the record, it's a Tumblr blog, so you get some of the great benefits that Tumblr does for you. It is a responsive application, and it's going to resize for you and everything. But I've went ahead and built out some of the different packages for the different platforms here. And this is one of the problems that we're trying to solve with ManifoldJS, is first of all, for the platforms that support hosted web apps, there's actually a different type of manifest for each of those platforms. And none of them yet conform to the standard. So what you have to do is you have one type of manifest for the web, which is a JSON object, right? And then you'll have a different one for FireFox OS. So that's a JSON object as well, but it's a little bit of a different pattern. And then Chrome OS as well, which again has a different style manifest for it. And they all have the assets different sizes of the assets that you need to upload for each of those. And then Windows 10 has even a different one. So this one is XML, not JSON. So as you can see, for every platform, you're building something different. But they all produce about the same thing. They all produce a hosted web app. Let me show you how it works with Chrome here. So I'm going to kind of side load this application with Chrome, and you can do that by pretending that it's a plugin. So I'm going to do my settings and extensions, and then I'm going to load an unpacked extension. And then when I open a new window here, so now you'll see my app here. Now, one of the things that you can do in Chrome is you can determine how you want that app to present itself. It can be a full screen application. It can have no Chrome around it at all. In this case, by default, it's going to make it just a window in your, or excuse me, a tab in your window, or you can have it open up your own window, or it can be windowed with no tile bar. You have those options for it there. So that's one way to do it. Let's go ahead and do the Windows 10 one as well, which remember is an XML one. So I'm going to just install that here, and it should open up the app for us. So here's that same application as a Windows 10 hosted app, which again has some of the same options where it can be a full screen application or it can be a windowed application as well. So what we face here is that we can create this already today. You can actually go out there on those platforms that support it today and create the hosted apps, which is fantastic, but it's a lot of work to keep the maintenance of each of the different manifests. So that's one of the things that we're trying to solve here. There's a standard out there from the W3C. It's the W3C, they actually renamed it from the Manifest for Web Apps to the Web App Manifest standard, which you can go to look up today. And that's like the FireFox and the Chrome one, a JSON-based manifest. But the idea is that you're going to be able to use this same manifest to create all of your applications. So the W3C manifest is supported today on Android and Chrome as well to allow you to add to home screen and get that same app experience that we just showed going through the Chrome store directly from the browser. So they're starting to support that there in Android, and Firefox is right around the corner as well, is releasing the support of that manifest through the Firefox browser as well. So we're starting to see adoption of that. We'll talk at the end about what you can do to help us move that adoption forward. But this is the same manifest that we're using from ManifoldJS to create the different hosted web apps. The idea being that the web is cross-platform. You want to make sure that your web apps are cross-platform as well. So you write to the W3C manifest standard, and then we'll go ahead and translate it to all of the platform's different manifests. So a lot of folks ask the differences between an installable web app and a hosted web app. An installable web app where we go to the store, or excuse me, we go to through the browser to a website, and there's usually a button or something that says install or add to home screen or something like that, that then creates the hosted web app experience on the user's device. And then hosted web apps generally refer to when you go to the store and you select it from the store and download it there. So I wanted to make sure that I outlined the differences between those two apps. And here they are. That was a joke. So they're the same experience to a user. A hosted web app and installable app should be the same experience to the user, we need to make sure that it's the same experience for a developer as well. If you build your web app one way through a browser to have the user add it to their device through a browser, and then you build it another way to have the user add it to their device through a store, it's going to be a bad experience for all of us. So that's another thing that we're trying to solve with ManifoldJS. We're trying to make sure that that experience is consistent for the developers. So now let's get into the tool a little bit. So ManifoldJS is going to generate the hosted web apps for all of those platforms that support it natively. Then we're also going to use a tool that we created called Manifold Cordova, which is a Cordova plugin, to then use Cordova to polyfill for the devices that don't support hosted web apps. So the idea is that you as a developer build a W3C manifest for web apps, and then you use that to generate the apps for Windows 10, for Chrome, for Firefox, for iOS, and for Android. And we'll spit out the packages for you. Now, one of the things that we talked about at the beginning about all of the frameworks that we see that talk about a one-click magic creating your app from your website, we're not trying to do that. This is still going to be your web app. So whatever types of quirks, the UI experience that you have with your web app is going to be the same thing that's going to translate over to the native apps, to the store apps for your users. It is a NPM tool, and I think that's important to mention because we're starting to see Node and NPM develop as a common platform for web developers, and mainly because it does run everywhere. So we built the tool using Node.js so that anyone who is running Node.js, whether it's on a Mac or it's on a PC or it's on a Linux machine, if they're running Node.js, they can install this tool through NPM and it should work for them to generate the applications for all the different platforms. So to do the demo, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start out on a Apple device, on a Mac. So I'm going to pull out my Mac here. And if you want to get the picture of the guy from Microsoft doing his demo from a Mac, make sure you get the sad face as well, right? Because that's an important part of the whole picture here. But the reason why I want to do this first demo on a Mac is because I realize a lot of web developers are out there using Macs to build their codes. And the very first thing that we want to be able to honor is the workflow that you already have as a developer. So if you're using a Mac to build your applications, your web app, we want to make sure that you can still use that Mac to create the store applications as well. So we'll actually cover the end-to-end experience for you so that you can generate the packages and everything all from your Mac, only needing the actual PC device or the Android device for the testing. Okay, so I'm in a command line here. I've already done the install. So it's an npm install ManifoldJS-G, and that'll get you here. And then the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with this application I have here. It's called Contoso Travel, and it's a made-up fake travel site. So don't go booking your next trip here. You'll get nowhere. But it's a nice experience because it's going to let you pick the city that you want to go to, pick some dates. Guess I'm going to travel through time to go to that. Add the friends that you want to take on the trip with you so that they'll get confirmations as well. And then you can add it to your calendar and have it send you a calendar invite. So again, this is a responsive web app that has a very application-like UI. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to use it as a demo here. So I'm going to take the URL for this. Okay, turn everything here. And then I'm going to go ahead and type in ManifoldJS in the website. The only other thing I'm going to do is turn on the debug level of logging so that you can see exactly what's going to happen. So the first thing that it's going to do is it is going to go out to the website, and it's going to look to see if it has a W3C manifest attached to it. And you do that with a link tag. If it does have a W3C manifest, it pulls that down. It looks at the image references. If there are any, it'll pull the images down and use them for the different packages. If it doesn't have one, it'll actually just look at whatever metadata it can about the website, like the title and the URL and things like that, and then create the packages from that, and then also create a W3C manifest for you so that you can then, moving forward, use that as your standard. So we have the applications generated here. All right, so you can see here I have Android, Chrome, Firefox, iOS, and web, and Windows 10. And then you also see a Cordova folder there because we use that, throw that out there in case you want to use the packages for some of the other Cordova platforms like Windows 8. So I've already, it takes a little bit of time to open this in Xcode. So I've already done that ahead of time and made sure it found all the files. So what we have is we get, if you go into oh, I'm already in there. Okay. So you'll see inside of here, I have a Xcode package that I can then open, and I can run it through a simulator. So I'll go ahead and do that. It should open up here. It's an old Mac, so it takes a little bit of time. So here we go. Now we have that app experience that we had on the web running inside of our iOS simulator. So same experience, being able to choose a city. Again, the experience that we built for the web is the same experience that your user gets when they use it through the application. Okay, so I've done that on the Mac here. I'm going to go ahead and switch back. And one of the things that I mentioned early on is the ability to be able to use the native APIs when you're inside of a hosted web app. So you have the ability to take advantage of the APIs on the platform for a lot of these platforms. So Chrome will give you a few extra APIs when you're inside of the hosted web app, Firefox as well. Windows 10 actually gives you access to the entire Windows API library that you have access to when you're writing an app in C++ or C#. So they give you all of those API accesses. And then you can actually use Cordova plugins as well to create the APIs that you want for the different platforms. So again, starting with this same web app here, on the PC side, I'm going to do the same thing. Okay. So I'll go ahead and run this on this side. Now you'll see some of the warnings and suggestions that come up, because what we're doing is we're looking and saying if you are missing any particular image sizes for a platform that you are generating, and when you don't specify a platform, it just gives you all of them. It's going to go ahead and give you a warning there and say, hey, we've substituted the lack of image with a generic image there. So That's what you're seeing in the log there. So I'm going to go ahead and then run this Windows 10 app, because I'm running on Windows 10. Note, you can only run the applications and test them on the platforms that are supported there. So I can't run the Windows 10 app from an iOS, and I can't run the iOS app from a PC. So you still need that platform to build it. The one thing we will do is we actually build the apps for you. The Windows 10 apps we can build for you on a Mac. So you can actually do that, but we haven't figured out a way yet to build the iOS apps on a PC. So if there's anyone who knows a great way, let me know. So we talked about those APIs here, right? So I'm going to go ahead and go through this experience again. But when we're inside of this application, we're able to recognize that it has access to that Windows object because it's on a Windows device. So it'll let you do things like open the contacts of the user, right? So that's an API that we can use there and decide which of your contacts instead of typing in your friend's info. Same thing with the calendar. Instead of sending an email for the calendar invite, we can actually open up the user's calendar, which I've obviously never used before, and add it directly to the calendar. And then even things like if we want to fire a toast notification when the time arrives, you can go ahead and do that. And all of those are native APIs. Those are APIs that you have access to because you're in an app that you wouldn't have access to on a website. So I highly suggest that you take advantage of those differentiators, because it's great that you can reuse the code on your web and you can keep your same workflow and all that type of thing. But now you're in an environment where you have the ability to do even more for the user, take advantage of the integration points with the OS. So I suggest that. Now, whenever you're taking advantage of those, we would want you to do it the same way that you do today to take advantage of an API that exists in one browser that doesn't exist in another. And that's to use feature detection. So in these scenarios, what I'm doing is I'm looking for the particular object that exists. So if I'm looking for something on the Windows 10 device that I don't have access to in the web, I'm going to search for look in window.windows. And if that Windows object exists, then I can use the JavaScript APIs inside of there. Or if I'm looking for a Cordova API, I can then say if type of window.cordova isn't undefined, then I know I'm inside of a Cordova app. So then I can execute the JavaScript that will work and make sure that I'm not executing it in the environments where it won't work. Another important thing that we're doing is supporting the crosswalk webview. So for those of you who don't know what that is, I suggest you go and look at it, because it's a project that takes Chromium and the latest version of Chromium and builds it out as a web view that you can add to your project. So instead of using the stock web view, and this is Android, instead of using the stock web view on Android, if you use the crosswalk web view, then on any device that is Android 4.0 and above, we'll get the web view with the latest version of Chromium. So if you can think about, like, maybe you have an application that uses WebGL. So WebGL wasn't supported until version 4.1, I think, of Android inside the web view. So if you had a device, and there's a lot of them out there, that was earlier than that, then WebGL wouldn't work. Well, if you build that application with Crosswalk, no matter what version of Android the user's on, they'll always get the latest version of the web view and being able to run something like WebGL. So it gives you the ability to have a more consistent dev experience across Android, which is really key. So if you're building with ManifoldJS and you want to use the crosswalk web view, you just add a -c to it, and it'll then add the crosswalk component. It takes a little bit of time to build the first time you do it because it's downloading all of the crosswalk stuff, but after that, it's pretty quick. The downside is it does add a little bit of weight to your package. I have a blog post out here that kind of walks you through the ins and outs, the benefits of it, and the things that you got to watch out for. But there's also ways that the user can add a crosswalk package to their phone so that it'll share it between other applications that use crosswalk and all that kind of stuff. So with ManifoldJS, there's also a number of options that we provide for developers to be able to build the applications. So the first one is the website. You can actually go to the website, and remember, it's a Node.js app, so it can run on a server as well, and that's all we're doing. We're running Node.js on the server. So it lets you run a generator there. You fill out a little form, and then we'll just send the packages to you. And of course, the CLI, which is what I've been demoing here, that you can go and do an npm install for it. If you're using Cordova, we actually have a plugin that we ourselves consume called Manifold Cordova. And that's what converts Cordova from a packaged application into a hosted application. So we take care of things like the whitelist because you want to make sure that the right network requests are let through and things like that. So we normalize the whitelist for you. We also handle offline so that it captures, like if your request is made when your app is offline, it can point to content inside the package and those type of things that just makes it work just like the other hosted apps on other platforms. Another thing that we're having beta is a toolkit for ManifoldJS, and this is something that we add that lets you do some other features inside your app, like JavaScript injection or CSS injection. If you want to add some styles on your website, you can actually include the CSS and the JavaScript in the package, and it gets injected whenever the page is ran. And things like menus and stuff like that. We're playing with that as beta because we don't know if that's really what developers want or not. So it's kind of out there, and we're waiting for developer feedback to know whether we're going to continue down that route or if there's other things we should be focusing on. Okay, so there's still some things that need to be done in this space to make it better for developers. Offline is a tough thing right now. You can use offline HTML5 specs that are out there today, like app cache, IndexedDB, those type of things. You can also add content to the package itself that will run when it's offline. The downside about that is that when you have to update that offline content, you have to do another deploy to the app stores and have to rebuild your packages. And that kind of is one of the things we're trying to avoid by leaving our content on the web server. But we do have some great new specs that are out there and just now starting to see the light of day. One of them in particular is service workers that gives us a standard way that we'll be able to handle off the web app when it's offline and be able to handle things like background tasks. So when we start to see standards like service workers fully adopted, then we're going to be able to write an offline experience or a background task experience one way and have it work on all of the different devices as well. Hyperlinks inside of hosted web apps are still something that we need to work on. So one of the things that we get from a hosted web app is we're able to specify our scope, okay? And let me show you an example of this. So I've got this other app here. It's a Contoso Bank app, right? It's a banking application. And what I want to make sure is that if I'm a user and I'm clicking on my accounts, I should be able to see that inside the app. But if I click on something that's not part of the app, like GitHub, that shouldn't open in the app, right? That'd be a confusing experience for a user if they are inside your app, and then they click on a link, and the next thing you know, they're in the open web. So we need to specify the scope of the application, when our web app starts and when the web app ends. So we can do that today with the manifest. All right. I'll show you the example for this one. So here we have a manifest. This is a W3C manifest. And we have the start URL, short name, and then I actually have here my whitelist access. Okay, this is something that we use for ManifoldJS that specifies all the different URLs that should or shouldn't be included inside of your application. Now there's already something in the manifest spec called scope. But one of the things that we're piloting here is scope is a single URL. So if your web app stretches across domains, or you have different subdomains that are part of your web app and others that aren't, then suddenly scope no longer works for you. So we really think scope should be an array. And that's what we're testing here with the whitelist. But what I'm doing is I'm actually specifying the URLs that are part of it, and anything that is in this list will appear inside the app. Anything that isn't will appear outside the app. So if I run this real quick, and one of the things you can do is I'm going to run it from this local manifest file. It doesn't have to be on your web server. So a URL here. And then for this, I'm going to point to that local manifest file. Okay, it's going to do the same thing, just as if that manifest was on your website. It's going to go look at that data, and if you have any of the icons listed, it'll go and download those icons, and then start constructing your packages for Windows, for iOS, for Android. So inside of here, it's went ahead and generated that for me. So I'll go ahead and run this app. And then what you should see is we've specified that anything that is on that domain is inside the app. So things like viewing my accounts should appear inside the app. Things like a link to GitHub should appear outside the app. So here's my account list. Viewing that appears inside the app. Here's my native push there. And then a GitHub should then open the default browser and then open up there, just like you would want, because you want to be able to specify scope. One of the things that we want to continue working on, though, is being able to handle the scope of the application so that if you hyperlink to something on the domain of the application, it will open the application instead of opening it in the browser. And this is something that's outlined in the W3C spec, but it's not yet, they haven't attempted to implement it anywhere yet. So that's something that we need to continue to work on, because hyperlinking is a really important part of the web, to be able to link from one place to another, from one app to another, and be able to have the user move easily between the two. We want to make sure that we continue to honor that when it's an app, not just a website. We also are going to continue working on the native APIs. We want to make it even easier for you to add those. Right now, you've got to detect from the server which platform you're on to make sure that you get the right version of Cordova.js on your page and things like that. We want to make that easier. We also want the W3C manifest to be supported in more places. So today we said we're starting to see it in Chrome and Firefox. We want to make sure that all browsers, all platforms support that. And we also want to see ManifoldJS support more platforms. So if you have a platform that you're fond of and it supports hosted web apps, or even if it just has a web view, let us know. We'd love to work in support for that. What can you do? First of all, I want you to build apps. I want you to go out there, take your great web app and turn it into a great store app. Submit it to the stores, reach more users. The second thing is we're always looking for support. This is a community-supported tool. The people who support it volunteer their time. So if you want to volunteer your time, be part of it, let me know. We're always looking for more developers. And then also, you can go out there and petition your browsers or your platforms for the manifest support. Let me show you really quick here. One of the reasons why we don't have it in Edge yet is when you go to the status.modern.ie site, and this is what you can go to see what features are supported in Edge and which ones aren't. And I look up the web app manifest. It says it's under consideration. It has 185 votes. We need to get that up to like 180, 18,050 votes or something like that, so that we can really make sure that it's apparent that developers want to see that. So go out to this site, vote it up, have the support in Edge as well. And then here's some resources if you want to dig a little deeper into it. And we'll make sure that these slides go up as well, and I can tweet a link to this out. But we have a lot of great getting started type of host. Just this week, we're working with NPM directly because they're really excited about seeing client tools like this on NPM. So there's a post that just went out on the NPM blog about building apps with Cordova and building apps with ManifoldJS, and when to use one versus the other, and some of the NPM modules that you can use to do that. And then, of course, the ManifoldJS website, where you can link to the GitHub and you can become a contributor and find out more information about the app. So that's all I have today. I'm sorry I didn't bring any stickers with me. I meant to bring them to distribute, but if you come see me afterwards, give me your address. I'll make sure that we mail one to you. So that's what we have. Thank you.